Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of K9s Talking Sense. I'm your host, as usual, Cameron Ford, and I am actually home here in Scent City, Las Vegas. Actually, for one of the few times that I'm actually home. So, since I was home, I'm able to do another podcast. I thought I would bring on a guest that many of you know from other circles, maybe not just detection, but she is in detection in different ways, and we'll talk more. But Sara Brueske, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I've listened to your podcast so many times, and it's a joy to actually be here now talking to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I look forward to you do a lot of things where you're sharing information with others. You have your Fenzi account or your school that you do there. And so a lot of people in various different disciplines, definitely I know I've run through circles who know who Sara is, but there's also a segment of our detection dog world that you would be a new name. And because of what you share and how you share, I really wanted to allow more listeners to learn from different points of view like that you have.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. And like you said, yeah, there's certain circles where it overlaps, and then there's a big chunk that I feel like I don't know anybody in as well. So I'm very, very excited to help maybe cross pollinate that a little bit.
Absolutely, and we'll get into some good conversations that definitely bleed into other areas. So, well, the first thing is just tell us about you. For those that don't know you, how did you get into dogs? What's the primary?
Oh, you broke up a little bit there. But you basically said, I'm sure, tell you a little bit about dogs, about what I do and how I got into dog training. So I'll kind of give you the quick and dirty version of that.
Okay.
I started dog training when I convinced my parents to let me get a border collie at 11 years old. And so I had wanted a frisbee dog, I wanted an agility dog, I wanted to do all the cool dog sports that I saw on TV through like the Purina Incredible Dog Challenge. And so I got this border collie and I fell in love with dog training and clicker training, read all the books, did all the things. And really, he was my start as far as getting involved in dog training goes.
Mhm.
So from there, I went ahead and I'm sorry, you cut out. I don't see you here anymore.
Oh yeah, no, I put you. It's your own screen now.
Oh, okay. That's a little weird. Okay. Sorry about that.
No
So
problem.
I had my border collie and I absolutely loved him, learned all about clicker training. He learned like 50 different tricks, by the time he was like 2 years old, something ridiculous like that. And he really made me fall in love with dog sports. Well, fast forward, I moved out. I wanted Great Danes. And so I got Great Danes and I fell in love with them as well. But I never really left that whole dog sport side of things. I wanted dogs I could do agility with and play frisbee with. And while my Great Danes love to do those things, they weren't really physically built for it. And so it kind of led me to start searching elsewhere for more active athletic dogs to play with. And so I got into fostering and rescue and border collies, and eventually got led to a breed called Australian Coolie. And so I imported a couple of those from Australia. And now I actually breed those, and they're really, really great dogs. But other than that, I got hired by Purina. I started playing frisbee with my dogs, got hired by Purina, and I was a demonstration trainer, performance trainer for them for like the past 8 years. So what that means is I would do any kind of like promotional shows for Purina, including like halftime shows, as well as performing like daily at their farm, Purina Farms in Gray Summit, Missouri. And so I kind of acquired dogs for that. I built a really great team of dogs, rescue dogs, small dogs, big dogs, breeder bought dogs, dogs I bred myself, and we would perform for the public all the time. And so most of those dogs are retired now. They are older. I've got a bunch of dogs in the double digits, but I have some young and upcoming dogs as well. I do compete in protection sports, so Mondio Ring and IGP. I used to compete in IGP. I do scent work with my dogs, agility with my dogs, dock diving. In fact, I just took them out dock diving today at an indoor pool here in Minnesota. And then, yeah, pretty much every sport, dog powered sports. I do joring with my dogs, and pretty much everything. I've done it, played with it, and competed in it.
Yeah, I was going to say you have done so many different things, and it's reflective of the population that I come across now, which I wasn't used to at first. I came from the professional world, and we kind of, I won't say we did one thing, because when you're working a dual purpose dog, it's a couple different things. But when I really started getting involved in training in the nose work community, every person, nearly every person that has their dog does a laundry list of things that, such as you mentioned, from the, dock diving to barn hunt to fast dog or fast cat or whatever it's called,
Mhm.
and agility. I mean, you name it, it's out there and they're doing it. And part of that for me was, holy cow. Well, some of the things that people dealt with was reference to the overlapping or conflicting games or exercises or things they did with their dogs. In certain aspects, obviously, in a lot of things you mentioned, a lot of attention and focus is towards the handler. But in
Mhm.
detection, it's completely the opposite. So a lot of things have, that I would help people work through were a reflection of just how the dogs dealt with the conflict of the learning aspect. So talk about, this would be a great point to kind of get into initially, is how do you deal with some of that or help with some of that clarity when you're jumping from one sporting program to another, and what are the pros and cons of that overlap?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question because yeah, like you said, in the sporting world, we want to show off our dog's versatility. So whether you purchase that dog from breeder or it's a rescue dog or anything like that, the big game is showing that your dog is able to perform in multiple different sports and that they have multiple talents. Versus, like you said, the detection world, the production world, you really want to specialize in that one thing. So it's very different as far as that goes. So, as far as training multiple sports, like you said, nose work, tracking, those sort of sports, you want your dog really dedicated to their job and not looking to that handler for any direction. Versus like obedience or even protection work or agility, they have to be finely tuned into their handler and observing those tiny, tiny little cues that they might miss otherwise. And so one of the things I really I teach is something called a start pattern and start cues for your dog. And this can be as simple as the phrase you say as you get them out of the crate. It could be the equipment you put on them, so a harness versus a buckle collar, for example, or a fur saver. It could be the pattern it takes for you to go from the crate to the actual trialing space or the training space. And sometimes it's a combination of all those things. If we look at the sport of IGP Schutzhund, right, that's a three-phase sport. And so while those dogs pretty much specialize in that sport, they're actually specialized in three different, very conflicting aspects of it. So they have tracking, and the dog has to come out and be very dedicated 30 feet in front of the handler, not looking back to that handler for any cues until they find that article. And then obedience, they have to be super tuned into the handler. And then they come back out and do protection, where now they have to be in tune with the handler, but they have a big distraction right there, and they have to show that decoy, the helper, a lot of force and recognition as well. And so switching between those three phases has really taught me a lot as far as what drives we want our dogs and where we want their mindset, where we want their arousal level, and how can I tell my dog, nope, we're doing obedience now. Don't come out looking for that helper. Nope, we're doing a tracking now. So stay, don't even look at me. You do you. And so that sport actually gave me a lot of that as far as learning how do I help my dog know what game we're playing in that moment.
Yeah, I've had a lot of good conversations with a common friend of ours, Michael Ellis,
Mhm.
and we have a lot of things that we're going to be presenting moving forward. And one of those is what you just brought up, a part of it anyway, which is habituation of certain types of cues. And these cues are to signal that we're doing this exercise. It's predictive to, oh, this is going to be nose work today, or this is going to be tracking or barn hunt, or whatever the thing is. Um, Mixing in there is communication that I'll go a little bit deeper with in regards to reward placement. Reward placement is going to be extremely important for the dog to understand in certain contexts. And we'll go with the detection, because detection, a lot of the reward context is, obviously about the location to the hide. So in at least in the beginning stage, we want to make sure that the dog is getting or understanding that the reward is coming from the location of odor, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Just like with many other things that you do and all the other programs that you do, reward location is important, but diversifying the reward location actually has more power to it, because the dog understands it's the behavior, not so much the reward position or location per se. I'll let you kind of expand upon that a little bit and your point of view about reward location, and how you manage that between your, again, some of the different sports. You know, you covered part of it, but whatever else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, definitely. When we think about even a sport like agility, there's such a fine balance between we want our dogs to be obstacle focused. So find the line of jumps, take the line of jumps in front of you, as well as also pay attention to my body language, pay attention to my verbal cues, so I can direct you around that course. And so with that sport in particular, there's a lot of times I want a reward from me to help balance that out and draw that focus and attention back to myself. But when I'm telling my dog, go, 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 and take that line of jumps and run out ahead of me, I'm going to have a placed reward, or I'm going to have a spot I can send my dog and tell them that their reward is coming to them. And so, for that reason, we have to have a lot of different ways of delivering the reward and a lot of different ways of telling my dog where that reward is going to come.
Yeah.
And so I know you deal with a lot of markers. And so for me, that's a bunch of different marker cues. I have my cue that tells my dog, go, go, go. I'm going to throw that toy out ahead of you. Come back to me. I'll reward you at my side, that sort of thing. And having those different cues and ability to reinforce my dogs in the way I want really helps to put the emphasis where I need it to be in those particular sports.
Yeah. And I think because we're creatures of habit, and or we become very loyal to what we initially learn, is why certain habits or techniques maybe stay around too long, such as like we talked about reward location, like it always in detection has to come from source. And when we can clearly use a marker, we can accomplish the same thing and create the understanding of the dog, hey, do this, and reward could come to you. And reward could also be back at me, and or reward could be off to the side someplace if we wanted to get really fancy with it.
Right.
Um, that leads into, the context of, and I, me and you talked about it a couple of years ago when we were doing the cognition seminar together. But talk about, so that way somebody in detection would understand what the room service marker would look like and how it works.
Yeah, so I actually had this discussion recently with a student, a room service versus a continuation type of a marker. And so
Hmm.
for me, I mostly use a continuation marker. It means keep doing the behavior you're doing, the reward will be delivered to you. So for scent work, this would be stay where you are with that indication. I'm going to bring you that reward at the source, right?
Yeah.
So for me, where I tend to use this is in stays or position changes. So
Hmm.
for obedience, it'd be position changes. And for that, I want if my dog, if I cue them to stand, for example, I say Dabu, and they stand, I'm going to say good. They should hold that stand as I walk up and deliver that reward. Now, room service might be slightly different. We want our dog just to stay in that place, but they don't have to hold a position necessarily. And so this
Hmm.
might be a really good one for a dog that gets a little wiggly when that reward is coming. Now you're not having to help maintain that behavior while their expectation of that reward is coming up. There are some differences though, and pros and cons to the arousal level as well, because if you have a dog that just gets really excited about that reward, maybe I want to bring their arousal down a little bit because they can't stay on task very well when they're very excited. I'm going to use more that continuation marker where I'm asking my dog to maintain that behavior and have that impulse control and do the thing so that the next thing I ask them to do, they're better mentally prepared for that. So
Yeah,
two
that's
words, yeah.
yeah, so that's huge. That's the motivation level is one of the biggest hurdles that teams go through, either too much motivation stimulation or not enough. And the critical key is, like you said, this is something that I always use now, thanks to Pat Stewart, is, as much as necessary, as little as possible. Help out is, get involved if depending on the dog's motivation and drive levels. How much do I work or have them aroused or excited? Or how do I manage that so they don't go over the limit? That's
Right.
a
My
big thing.
version of that is I am a lazy trainer and I don't want to have to add anything in that I'm going to have to eventually fade later on. But if I do need to help my dog a little bit, I'm going to add in as much as I need to help my dog without having extra stuff to fade. And so coming into arousal level and excitement and motivation and all that, um, especially the way I train, if I have too much of that, that's something I have to bring down later on. So I'm super careful about where I put arousal. And for behaviors I don't necessarily want crazy arousal in, like a long downstay, for example, I'm not going to train that in a high drive situation. I'm not going to get my dog super excited because that means later when they know the behavior, now I've got to work on calming them down in that behavior.
Hmm.
And so I'm always thinking about that. How is my reinforcement? How is my delivery of that reinforcement impacting my dog's arousal level? And should I get my dog that excited about the thing that they're actually doing?
Now, do you use various types of rewards in certain stages of training to help manage that?
Yeah, so yep, so I do use food rewards or toy rewards for different reasons. But within those, I mostly focus more on the delivery of the reinforcement. So I'm not one of those is like my dog really loves this particular toy, so I'm gonna use that particular toy. Typically, I'm gonna play with whatever I have available, but how can I make that particular toy very exciting to my dog, or how can I make it more calm to my dog, depending on where I want their arousal level to go. So same with food. Again, I want to be lazy. I don't want to have to spend a lot of money on fancy, expensive treats. I don't want to have to make sure I cut up my hot dogs before a training session because I forget all the time. I want to be able to just grab a handful of their kibble and have the excitement level I want for that kibble. So while that kibble might be boring to my dog in the context that they get it every single day out of their bowl, I can make that kibble very exciting through treat tosses and through luring and more food games that way. So if I do need to increase the value of the food, so I'm working with like a particularly distracting situation, then I will. But again, my goal is to bring it back down to kibble and not have to rely on that higher value reward.
Yeah, and what you brought up was style of engagement there, the how the rewarding event can be, and it's very important. And it's the what I and I don't know if you have, but what I've run into when working with various people in the dog or detection sport program, so nose work or scent work, when I bring up options to play in a sense with food by food tosses, making it excitement with delivery and kind of get these dogs to engage a little bit stronger. um, the risk or the concern that they come to you with as a trainer is, well, if I start doing that too much, food tosses specifically, my dog may focus on the ground too much looking for treats. Valid point, but how would you answer that question if someone says, "Hey, I like this idea, but I'm afraid it might cause my dog to start looking to the ground too often for treats that they've expected to be tossed or could be on the ground."
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of our reward delivery, I want to have that on cue the best I can. So when I say get it, that's their cue to look to see where that food's going to be thrown. And the mechanics of it actually come into play with preventing them searching for that food before it's thrown. So I want to make sure there's a good pause between the word itself and then the delivery of the reward. If there's not, if I say get it as I'm throwing that food, then my dog is going to spend the time looking at my hand, looking at the ground, looking for that food, rather than using that word, the get it cue, as a cue that the food is coming. But if I put a pause there, if I say get it, count one, two in my head, then toss the food, they're going to start realizing that the food only happens when I say those words. Because our dogs spend so much time looking at our bodies and ignoring what we're saying, it's really important to have those clean mechanics as far as our marker cues and then the treat deliveries. And then, of course, there's some things we can do as far as impulse control. I do food bowl games. So I put food on the ground or in a bowl on the ground, and I reward my dog for engaging with me. And then I tell him to take it on a cue. So that's another verbal cue I can use or marker cue I can use is sending them to a placed reinforcer on the ground. And I'm just gonna make sure that's on cue. So now that there's food on the ground all the time, but they only go to it when I cue them. So I'm actually proofing against them looking for that food on the ground. So typically with my training, anytime I see a potential hole, like, ooh, maybe they're going to be searching for food on the ground, I'm going to train the extreme version of that of, yes, there is food on the ground, but only go to it when I tell you to go to it.
Yeah, mechanics, timing, communication are three main pillars of a lot of the stuff I've even been revamping my curriculum towards. The Because just like you said, that's how I combat it too. Is we put it on cue. There's a signal, and like you said, coming towards me, in this case, towards my hand, and then as they get there, I can do the food toss, and or. But I've already built these things in before I get into various stages of detection. So therefore, um, we're avoiding some of those making of some habits. But with that said, at any point in time, we can incorporate these things, but we need to build them away from the detection. So therefore, there's not the overlapping or confounding confusion that might come into the detection aspect, which we didn't want, even though we were really working on, these other things, the mechanics of reward that had nothing to do at that time with detection. But what a lot of people end up doing is they try to do those things while they're doing detection, and boom,
Yeah.
downriver, all these issues start popping up because the dog didn't associate it the same way that you hoped it did, because you were in your mind, you were working on mechanics of reward delivery, but the dog was like, this is detection, and so it
Yeah,
kind of
we
goes that
always want to
way.
make sure we're training those marker cues separately and making sure our dog understands them before adding them into our training. Because ultimately they are behaviors. And so we wouldn't train two behaviors at the same time in a session, two brand new behaviors, right? We'd split those apart, make sure our dog understands one, and then work on the other one. So same thing with our marker cues and reinforcement delivery before adding it to a game like nose work for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, it's important that we separate and kind of categorize certain things that we're working on, so that way we eliminate or help reduce confusion on the dog's part. So many times, though, I know it's difficult. We want to just jump right in, and we see something, we want to go work on it right there. And when we really should do something, taking that away and isolate some things. So this brings me to another point, talking about reset criteria.
Hmm.
Reset criteria is a really good component to introduce and to use in various types of training, not just what I do frequently detection, but in a lot of other things. Talk about like how you explain, I know how I would, but I want listeners to hear how you explain reset criteria and what that kind of means. And you can pick any topic you want, but kind of go through the what's required and what you do to accomplish that.
Yeah, let me just double check that we're on the same page for
Yeah.
requirement. What is your definition for it?
So for me is, let's say we're doing whatever in detection. Let's say what I call it, say simple searches,
Mhm.
and I can see the dog is distracted by whatever item it is in that space, another non-target item. So instead of trying to proof the dog off of that distracting item in that search, we're done. We're gonna reset and go back to a very controlled way where I can say, here's the target item, here's the non-target item. If you pay attention to the non-target item, nothing happens, but the right answer is right over here. So it's not very far to go away to go put their nose or pay attention to target. And once they do, they're rewarded. And we just change those up left and right or forward and back, whatever we want to do, and get the dog to start to ignore that. Then I'll maybe reintroduce, but in a controlled way again, back into a search environment, that distracting thing along with target odor. But in that reset, as I'm moving forward, they are fairly close enough that if the dog were to kind of linger at the non-target, the right answer isn't far away. So therefore, getting to the right answer is much easy accomplished as compared to, in most cases when we're training, we have the target over here, and it could be three more rooms down. Sorry, we have the non-target over here, and three rooms down is the target. So then the dog doesn't make that connection.
Yeah, so it sounds like okay, so you set up something, some sort of training session for your dog, and oops, there's a failure, right?
Yep.
And so how do we split that apart and teach them the thing we want them to be successful the next time we set up that same challenge, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so for me, I would do it very, very similarly. So I normally give my dog 2 chances. The first time, if they make a mistake, "Ooh, oh well,"
Mhm.
I'll reset as far as that rep goes and give them a second chance. I might use a non-reward marker, and that just tells my dog that, "Nope, that wasn't the thing I wanted. There's no reward coming." But it depends on the dog and it depends on their understanding of the non-reward marker in that situation. It's not something I use often. But if I have a dog that's resilient enough, that communication can actually be very, very helpful for them. So then I give them a second chance. If the second chance happens the same as the first one, then we need to split that apart and we need to unlump the training situation and
Mhm.
isolate that variable and work on it that way. Um, Typically, I don't believe first reps, whether
Yeah.
they're successful or not successful, because especially if it's our dog's first time seeing a challenge or seeing a train session or learning a behavior, it doesn't tell us a lot if they stumble upon it on that first one and are successful that way. Even if we jackpot it, even if we reward it and we assume that oh, wow, they learned this super fast. Oh, wow, they ignored that food bowl. They may have just not realized that it was there. So the
Yeah.
second rep always tells me the most information. Now they know that food bowl's there. Do they still choose to ignore it or not? And same with sessions. So my first session teaching a new behavior, if I get to whatever step in my training plan, I was successful with that, I don't necessarily believe that that is what my dog understands they took away. The second session now will tell me the most information as far as what they took away in that learning process. And so I was trying to watch that second rep or that second session more than the first one and use that as my guiding as far as where their training point actually is. And then, yes, like you said, to take it away, look at what the variable was that I changed. So whenever we are proofing or teaching and making something more difficult, we always want to change just one variable at a time. And so that way we know what we changed, right? So, yep, my
Mhm.
dog, I know they can do a search in this space. They've been in this environment before. Let's add a distraction to it. Now we know that that one distraction was the big variable that changed. I could also change the difficulty of the hides. That would be a separate variable, but I would want to do those in two different sessions. I wouldn't want to increase the difficulty of a hide and add a food distraction at the same time because now I don't know
Correct.
which one caused my dog to be failed. Even if they didn't go for the food bowl, the mere presence of that food bowl impacts their searching ability. And so, same thing with other sports. So I can be working on a verbal cue. I did this today with my dog,
Yeah.
actually. I could be working on a verbal cue for a directional wrapping a jump. Actually, it was a backside. So I was teaching her the backside to turn away from me to take the backside of a jump, which is a skill she didn't have yet. But I had also had a food bowl placed out because I was working on go, go, goes at the same time.
Okay.
And so she was really struggling because one, it's not a new verbal cue, but it was a new setup for that verbal cue. So I had made it more difficult by the setup. And there was a food bowl distraction, which is also difficult for her. And so I didn't know which one had impacted why she was struggling so much. So I took the food bowl away, broke it down, practiced a few of the verbal cues that she knew, the setup that she knew, and then brought it back to that more challenging setup. And then maybe we'll add the food bowl back in another session, seeing how she comes back with that second session with the same setup.
Yeah, it's well, you brought in a topic there in that great example that became. We did a video on it. I don't know if you saw it, but my trainer Natalie and I wanted to share it. But it's the no reward marker, and boy, did that cause confusion,
Mhm.
questions, you name it. It surprised me how controversial in a sense that it was. So I'll let you give the definition of a no reward marker, and if you want to give an example of how you would use it in detection. And I love that you said, even when you gave the description there, in a sense, it's not something you do every time, which is I think people try to when they hear the word marker, it automatically or it's assumed that it's something that's used frequently like it is in other categories. So I'll let you kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I could definitely see that confusion with that term, but I think the marker word is used because it does pinpoint that exact moment that a thing happened. So we want to mark that moment just like we do with our normal markers, right? We want to mark the moment the behavior happens so our dog knows that reinforcer is coming. So if my dog makes a choice to do something that isn't quite right, I can use a marker in the same way and tell them that that thing that they just did actually means that it's not what I wanted and the reward is not coming. I don't know if I necessarily use these in detection. I was trying to think of a example of that. I tend
So
to.
I was gonna say the example that we gave, just to give you context, was Natalie had her dog searching containers, and he just offered the behavior at the very first container. So
Mm,
she gave him nope, and as soon as she said nope, off he went, searched, and did great. So because like, that was the preface we made to everybody was, look, this is something you can use when you do know where the what the answer is, and two, you're at a stage of training that the dog understands these things. We're not trying to teach it in the middle of a detection problem or throw out a word that the dog knows it means no, or whatever, negative association that the dog may have with something. We have it's a particular word that means try again. And
Right.
so go ahead. That gives you better context than what we shared, so that way you can see it.
So like everything else, we have to train it outside, and so I'll share the most common place I use it, and I think the
Mhm.
place that is the most effective is with Creature. He's my Mighty Ring
Mhm.
3 dog, and so he was trained without tools, without pinch collar, e-collar. And one of the tools I use with him is a non-reward marker. So I have a way
Mhm.
of telling him that he didn't do the thing I wanted, and if he wants the game to continue, we need to try it again. And so, the way I taught this away from bite work to begin with, so in a place where he's a little bit more open to learning, his arousal isn't sky high. I mean, it is, it's Creature, it's always sky
Yeah.
high.
Yeah.
um, was through marker games with a toy. So he has a lot of markers. I think he has over 16 different markers. But his toy ones, we have a game. I call it the marker discrimination game. And it's a good way for me to test to see where his brain is when we're out training. So can he respond to the verbal cues on how to play with the toy with me? So I have one that means bite the toy because we're going to tug. I have one that
Okay.
means get ready. I'm going to throw it. I have one that means take it off of the ground. And I have one that means stay where you are. I'll put it in your mouth and then we'll tug. So of
Okay.
those four, I can switch between those pretty fast, right? So he's
Mhm.
tugging. I can say chase, which means I'm going to throw it. He should pop off, get ready for that throw, and then I'll throw it. I can have a second tug on the ground, and as he's returning, I can say take, and he should drop the toy he has and slam down and grab the toy that's on the ground. So I want to see that sort of response. But the cool thing is I can teach my non-reward marker in that same game, right? So I can get him
Mhm.
to a point where he's really excited, or not even when he was just a puppy and he was learning this, and I cued chase and he bit the tug, which is not the right behavior for that cue. I could just say nope or no. His is actually just no. It's a neutral sounding no. I'm not like
Sure.
really, you know,
Yeah.
nope or sorry. I have two different ones for him. And then nothing would happen. I would just freeze. For him, the game is playing with me. So if I go neutral, he's like, well, the game stopped, and I would cue it again, chase. And if he responded the correct way, then I would throw it and we'd throw a party for him. So in that game that he learned as far as verbal discrimination, how he learned his marker cues, I was also able to train him that non-reward marker. And he learned that that non-reward marker means the game is just on pause. We'll try it again, and then we'll start it
Mhm.
again on the right response. And so taking that, then I can go ahead and apply that to his obedience. I can do position changes, sit, and if he doesn't sit, sorry, we'll try it again. Sit,
Mhm.
and then I
Mhm.
can go ahead and reinforce that second attempt. And then it goes all the way to our bite work. If I have him in heel, and the call off is a great example, right?
Yeah.
So I can send him to bite the decoy. And if I whistle and he doesn't respond, I can say sorry. And he's coming right back to me. He's like, oh, the game's just not going to happen then, right? Because
Mhm.
the decoy is going to be neutral. Like it's not going to be fun, right?
Yeah.
So he'll come back to me and we'll try it again. And so that's a really good way. His enthusiasm isn't altered at all. It's just a communication for him. He knows that, oops, we did it wrong. If he wants the game to continue, then we have to try it again. And I might adjust some criteria. I might make it a little bit easier for him so he can be successful. Because ultimately, if I have to use a non reward marker, that's information to me that the situation I just put my dog in is too difficult. And so, like
Mhm.
you said, it's not something I want to use regularly. I do not rely on it for my training.
Correct.
My goal is to go into a session and not have to use it. However, things happen, and sometimes I push my dog a little bit too hard. Whatever, we all do it, and I have that way of communicating to him that that was not what I was asking for in that moment.
And there's a couple different things to kind of go over in what you described there. So I'll pick the first one, the bite work one, because those that do bite work that may be watching or listening to this, the example you gave of, let's say, the recall, right? So the dog takes off, you give the whistle, dog doesn't do it, and you say sorry. So many of the handlers, obviously, that I know are like, yeah, whatever, my dog's gonna run down there and just bite the guy and have a blast. I don't care if he's standing still or not. What they're not understanding about that is you won't even go to that level until you've already built it solid in all the other early stages where the criteria is much lower, value and distractions are much lower, and you've built that clear understanding of these consequences and communication.
Correct.
And many of them, like I said, that goes back to detection. They want to fix it at this other point in the training, and that's not the right time for it. You need to reset, go back to whatever stage you need to, depending on whatever the thing is, work on it in a very low criteria, very easy variable, high levels of reinforcement, and get the dog to understand what we're trying to do.
Right.
That's where I think people misunderstand. They hear something like that example, or they hear in detection, oh, we used a no reward marker, nope, in the video. And then their reply to that is, well, then that means the dog will just wait for nope, 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 yes. And then they're going to just go, I'm like, no, that's not the case. We're not playing the game of confirmation with the dog.
And I think
This
people
is a
tend to forget that our dogs are a little bit lazy too, and they want to be as efficient as possible. So it's not in their nature to go to every single one to get a nope. They're going to try to be right. They're going to try to be as efficient as possible to get the thing that they want.
Mhm. Absolutely. And you know, that's the tough part about these days is, I know this, trying to share information online is not easy. And you can't even, this is the biggest, Michael and I are going through, like, how do we, he and I are fairly old school. I know you kind of fit in our same category where we want to give you the information the right way, and that takes time.
Mhm. Yep.
I can't give you 10-minute snippets and have you understand the whole context of what we're doing. But with that said, we have to engage, do enough with whatever we're presenting that's engaging and it grabs them to pay attention for more than 10 minutes.
Right.
Because, as we both know, when people hop online, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, etc., and they see a video that's 15 minutes or so, they're like, oh, where's the shorter one?
That's way too long. Yeah. No.
Yeah, yeah. So it's taking this information that we're sharing on this podcast, but in trying to, as instructors, give people the critical pieces of information, knowing that they're only going to digest the 5 to 10 minute chunks at best.
Right.
In a totally different topic, I'm just curious. Online learning has grown tremendously, and you've been in that for quite some time. The talk about how you try to the challenges of explaining things through online media version. What recommendations do you give people that either come to your class or go to any class online? What's a good way to do that, and what are things to kind of pay attention to and look forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, teaching online is a whole skill set in itself because when you teach in person, you get to get that immediate feedback from the student as far as whether they're understanding what you're saying or not.
Absolutely.
And like being able to look out at an audience when you are teaching a seminar and seeing if you're seeing those confused faces and that type of reaction. And with online learning, you don't quite get that same feedback, even if you're doing Zoom or something along those lines where you're seeing the other person. It's not as direct, and you may not pick up on those subtle cues as well.
Hmm.
So if you're teaching online, because I'm sure we have a lot of trainers that are teaching
Yeah.
classes online right now listening, my biggest thing is try to always have at least 2 or 3 different metaphors or ways of explaining certain things and have them lined up ready to go. So we do this in classes, but I don't feel like as much as we need to for an online. And so typically I'll have somebody I'll explain something, and I think I do a really good job, and I see the video, the person submitting their homework, I'm like, "Oh, that's not exactly what I said." But that's exactly how they interpreted it. So now I have to think, "Okay, how can I explain this in a way that might get what I want across a little bit better?" And so I'll have those 2 or 3 different ways of explaining things to try to morph what they interpreted into the thing I'm actually wanting. So that's a whole skill set within itself. As
Oh
far
yeah.
as
I mean, go ahead.
yeah, no, good. I was going off onto another thing, so
No, no. So I was just piggybacking to say that is critical in a sense because it's so hard to know what the student is taking in from the online,
mhm.
whether it be from a video or how I instructed something, and how that interpretation can be
It's wild.
so different than what you thought you were explaining. In
It's so
my head,
yeah,
yeah, I've been like, I know I was teaching this, but how it was taken in or interpreted, or the other part that we can never account for, and this is in person or not, is what little piece did they grab a hold of?
Hmm.
And that becomes what they focused on, and they miss these other things that are super relative to that one part they grabbed,
Right.
and we don't know that when you're not in person. You just see it or hear it or whatever later on. Or I get every now and then is like, oh yeah, I watched your video, this is this is what I do, and I'm like, oh no, that
No.
wasn't, no. No, we actually meant this. So, and no reward marker was one of those ones that was super interesting to see the
Mhm.
takeaways from that. You said you're gonna go down another path. What were you gonna
Well,
bring
actually, circling back to that, I I've gotten a little bit more lax now as as a teacher online for quite some time. I stopped being so nitpicky about the things that don't matter, and you'll learn
Okay.
pretty fast about the things that actually do matter in your methods, and which ones are like, that's kind of open for interpretation. And let's see how the dog's responding before I get on the handler about no doing it my specific way. Because ultimately, the students do know their dogs way better than I ever will because I can't even touch their dogs, right? I'm trying to teach them how to teach their dogs through a computer. And while I might have this method down for how I do it, every handler is different and every handler has their strengths and weaknesses and every dog has their strengths and weaknesses. And so often I'll see something like, okay, that's not quite how I wanted, but let me see how that second session goes. And if they're making progress to the goal and I'm not seeing anything that's going to hinder their progress or become a bad habit in their goals later on, I'm going to let it slide. So a lot of the behaviors I don't really care about mechanics on as far as markers and that sort of thing because ultimately it doesn't matter. There are certain things, especially like I had mentioned before, where I do want that pause and I do want the delivery to be a certain way, but it's only for those specific times. There are a lot of behaviors you can teach your dog where really ultimately doesn't matter. But what does matter is that the dog is enthusiastic, that they're not getting frustrated, and that the handler is enjoying the training because they should enjoy that training as well. And so if I get on them about these tiny little nitpicky details that matter to me, but ultimately won't matter to them and their goals, or it's not going to impede how the dog's learning anyway, I might actually end up hurting that handler's enthusiasm as far as taking classes online or doing sports with their dogs or doing that next session. And so ultimately, that's my goal is to make sure that the handler and the dog are both having fun and they're making progress to what they're trying to learn from me.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. And I've gone through that learning lesson myself. Um, I used to have very specific things of how it should be done or whatever, just through the experience and going, this is important. But also realizing over the years and more recent years that, okay, let's work on this thing. And the best part is learning is the dogs are so forgiving of us and our errors that that kind of makes up for those things that you and I would be sticklers on, like it should be done this way. But lo and behold, the dog still understands it despite the handler error or the whatever that happens. So it's super important to understand that, and also understand if you're a handler, it's okay to make mistakes. We
Mhm.
want the mistakes to happen. There is no perfect runs. There's no perfect handlers. So we embrace those things because it's still learning.
Right. Right.
We still have our takeaways and we can improve upon that. And it takes time. We can't rush any of these things.
No.
We can't rush getting information in little short spurts. It will take time to get good at anything. So just enjoy the process, have fun with it,
Absolutely.
and enjoy that learning.
Uh,
So go ahead.
Yeah, and ultimately, I learn so much more from my students. Every time they interpret something
Yeah.
slightly different, I'm like, wait, no, that actually could work. Let's roll with that. Let's see what it turns into. And then pretty soon it's in my lectures for the next round of class because I'm like, nope, here's a whole nother method that I never even thought of. But my student just kind of happened upon based on their interpretation of what I was trying to get them to do. And it works just fine and actually might help certain dogs that were not succeeding with my original method. So yeah, like I'm all for students trying their own thing and me just being that guiding force to make sure that they're not going to end up down some tangent that doesn't, give them the progress that they need.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I wanted to ask you, what do you enjoy training most? You are a active trainer, but you've never left being a handler. So you're always doing that stuff. So what are the things that Sara loves to do? Like you're like, oh, I can't wait to get out and go work this.
Well, That's kind of hard to say because I feel like it's a fleeting moment, as far as what I love each day. So today by itself, today I had agility ring rental, so I worked, a couple dogs in agility, and then I did some obedience in the back room after my agility ring rental, and then I went and did duck diving immediately after that, and I'll probably set up a nose work hide later, for my young dog here. So, yeah, doing all of them right now. Mondioring was my really, really hardcore passion probably for the past 5 years with Creature. I've been
Mhm.
super dedicated to that because it's a sport that you have to live, breathe, eat, and sleep. But now that he has his three, I've given him the winter off, and agility has really kind of stepped back up into being my main favorite. So that was my original sport I did was agility,
Mhm.
and because of my job, I kind of stepped back from it, not really trialing my dogs as much as I could just during the off season because they were working so hard for me. I didn't want to add extra stuff to their plates. But I have a young dog, Vibrant. She's a coolie bred by me, and she's really excelling at it. So I'm having a ton of fun regaining all my handling and learning all the new moves and improving verbals and all the cool new methods of training that has kind of popped up over the last 8 years, or I've been just dabbling in it. So that's a lot of fun. I've really
Yeah.
been bringing back into agility.
So tell us about coolies, because some people know what these are, but a lot of people, including myself years ago, had no clue. And why coolies, and what do you enjoy about working and training them?
Yeah, so coolies are an older breed from Australia. They were closely related to kelpies back in the day, long time ago. Solid dogs were called kelpies and the merle ones were called coolies. And at some point, I think 150 years ago, 200 years ago, they split off as their own breed. And so kelpies are their closest relative, but they're pretty different. Kelpies tend to be really strong eyed dogs like a border collie in their herding style. They tend to be a little bit more serious workers. Coolies are goofy. They're more upright. You do have some strong eyed ones depending on the line. They are goofy, they are hilarious, they are troublemakers, they are very creative in their thinking, and they're very, very smart, and tend to be more on the independent side. Owners of them tend to compare them to terriers and cats. So you have to get really creative with your training with them. They've taught me more than probably any other breed out there, but I wouldn't trade them for anything. I think they're absolutely fantastic. I feel like I have to be 2 steps ahead of them at all times and try to think about all of the creative ways that they could potentially interpret what I'm trying to teach them. Um, but as far as, like, what they look like, they are, pretty much a generic herding breed. Their lines vary a ton. There is no actual physical standard for them. There's more of a working standard. But they tend to be a merle heavy breed, so, kind of that splotchy color, and they can be any color. I like the smaller, lighter framed ones, so they generally be around 30 pounds, about 19 to 20 inches at the shoulder, and long hair, short hair, whatever they got.
Yeah, they definitely not only are, such a breed to work with, but those that know you, is it must be a fun breed to do your other hobby with, which is photography.
Yes.
Um, how did you get into photography?
Um, I was on a dog forum called Chaz Hound years ago, and that was the cool thing is you do take pictures of your dog and post a thread of like 20 photos of your dog from that day. So I'm sure there are people listening that were on Chaz Hound. It was its own little community, and we kind of all grew up in the dog sport world together. And so I started then, and then kind of just snowballed from there. We talked a little bit before we started recording about how it's kind of necessary right now in the social media era to be able to take photos of your dogs to help promote things and to have photos and videos to kind of use as your demos and stuff like that. And so that's really kind of fanned the fire. But other than that, it's always been a creative hobby of mine. And I love it. And the coolies are gorgeous, and they're always more than happy to play model for me.
I mean, you have, yeah, I've admired from afar one of the photography skills you have, especially with active dogs. Getting a good dog that's moving quickly and get a great image of it is getting all of these other little things on the camera right. From the lighting to the ISO, your aperture, all this stuff. I'm still, I'm as green can be as I'm learning this. So I always kind of gravitate to what gets my attention. So stuff that you do, Pat Stewart does, and some others have, got me learning it. So those that want to get into photography that are dog people, how do you recommend they get into it? Which what would be like your step? Like, I would work with this kind of camera, or take these kind of classes.
So right now, so I do want to say that I learned all of my action dog stuff from Claudio Piccoli. He's an Italian photographer and he specializes in action dog photography and he does workshops all over the world as well as online. So if you are a photographer already, he's a great one to go through and he takes you through his editing process as well as how to get those really fantastic shots. So he is my everything as far as where I've learned it from.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's fantastic. Other than that, I do have a 4-week class going on in my Facebook training group right now on photography. So we just covered 2 weeks um, on how to like frame the photo and what should your settings be at for action versus portrait and all of that stuff. And then we'll spend the next 2 weeks just on editing. And so how do you get those eyes to pop and what do you do with the curves and stuff like that? And so there's a bunch of people in there right now just shooting with their cell phones. And then there's a few people with the big cameras that are shooting a little bit more the big photos and wanting to get into it a little bit more.
Are you going to be doing that class again in the future?
Well, all of the content will be on there forever. So it is a paid
Ah,
group. So
perfect.
you just have to, it's a $25 one-time fee to join the group. And then that's all there forever with a nice convenient little
Perfect.
hashtag that you can search.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, and I can say, like I said, being a brand newbie myself, a lot of my stuff was coming from what I joke around now is YouTube University.
Yeah.
Hopping on there and going, why is this not working, or what do I do? And so I shared a video, did an action camera video because those are what people gravitate to, just for the learning aspect, or they're shooting their detection searches. So having a DJ action or a GoPro and all those different things, your phones, those were things I was sharing. But what kind of equipment would you recommend a beginner if they say, okay, I want to get into this? What would you recommend them to start with?
I would recommend going to your local camera store and talking to them. Often they have used equipment for sale at a very reasonable price and let them know what you are taking photos of. So whether you want a camera that maybe you have kids or grandkids and you want to be able to take photos of your dogs or videos or anything like that, let them know and they will be able to help direct you the best way possible. I tend to buy used equipment. It's cheaper. And if you buy it through local camera stores, oftentimes they have really good warranties on their used equipment. And so it kind of takes a little bit of that risk away versus buying it on marketplace or something along those lines. But other
Yeah.
than that, like, I don't have recommendations as far as entry level equipment just because the market changes so fast and so much. Right now, in the last 4 years, the mirrorless craze with the big cameras has come through, and every single year they're coming out with something bigger and better or more user friendly or along those lines. So definitely talk to your local camera store. Those people know what they are looking for and they'll help direct you to what best suits your needs.
Yeah, that's really good info right there because there are so many wormholes you can go down
Mhm.
when it comes to the parts and the bodies and the lenses and all of these amazing things that work together or not so much work together, depending on what it is you're doing. So super cool. Now, as we talked about what you like that and photography, you and I first got together over cognition
Mhm.
and talk a little bit about what your takeaway was because people have always gone to me and been like or thought cognition is related to detection dogs and it's way beyond that. So I'd love them to hear from your point of view what you saw in cognition and what your takeaways were, and obviously we'll be going further with it in the future, but I would love listeners to kind of hear what your takeaways were.
Yeah, when we hosted you at Purina Farms, we had a big variety of dogs that took the workshop. A lot of agility people. We had some detection people in there, some protection sport people as well. Just kind of really learning about how their dog learns. And there were so many people that had big takeaways, myself included. My big thing was that Creature was very pattern orientated, and so my question at the time was, because I had wanted him to be pattern orientated, I spent a lot of time teaching him patterns as far as for monitoring where do I want his arousal level. I want him to know what exercise is coming. I want him to be, I want him to recognize those patterns. And so I spent a lot of time teaching him patterns. And so it was always a question for me. was he born that way? And I just wasted my time making sure I taught him that and, like, really ingraining that, and, like, he would have been that way anyway? Or was that helped through my training, like, as a puppy and showing him and really guiding him? And so I think that's such a cool thing to ponder now that I have the information that he is very pattern orientated based on his cognition tests.
Mhm. Yeah, the memory with the dog like him was strong, and that's what I love that people like yourself have gotten into it and have seen it because it really just helps you understand that dog and what makes that dog tick. What's its learning strategy? Is it like I always share, is it memory or is it inference? And
Mhm.
how to capitalize upon those, no matter what it is you're training your dog to do. Knowing that will make you more efficient in how you communicate whatever the task is, or understand why does it keep doing the same thing over and over again. Well, this is the reason why, was that was how it's a very strong memory dog, so it likes
Right,
to it, or excels with patterns and things like that. So yeah, it was always so fun to watch. um when I get exposed to somebody like you, who is a very known dog trainer, has lots of good experiences, and has not seen that before, and your takeaways always add to my. This is why I share it. This is why I love
right.
doing it.
Right.
So
Well, it's so cool if we think about it in another sport. So like protection sport, yeah, that's different from detection, but there's some overlap there. But even agility, right? Because I
yeah,
don't want my dog to be memorizing the agility course. I don't want my dog picking
yeah,
up those patterns. There are some aspects of it, like a serpentine or something along those lines, that we do want them to, but mostly we want them looking to us for that guidance. So if you test your dog and you see that they're more of a memory dog versus an inference dog, like that's really good information that your training should lean more heavily on changing up that pattern and not practicing those courses over and over again, but making it different each rep.
yeah. And one of the things I've actually even added since I saw you is we have a whole results section now, and we go over what the results mean, whether it's a search and rescue dog, or an agility dog, or an assistance dog, or a detection dog, and maybe it's a Mondio dog. We actually have a whole Mondio club coming to our next cognition seminar, so that'll be a lot of fun. But and I didn't have that before, but I've learned by going around and doing these tests on a much bigger scale over the past number of years, is it's allowed me to also get better data to kind of give results based on these different categories of whether the person just does obedience and, like I said, agility and all the other things that are out there outside of detection. I have results now that kind of cover, here's this is why you see what you see, and this is why you may want to make this kind of adjustment,
Right.
depending on whatever it is that you're training. So, no, it's cool. So detection, how did you get in detection? And tell us about some of the plans that I know you want to do. I know detection is one of the things you want to get into deeper coming up, but how did you get into it, and what do you like best about it? And then what do you have, you want to get into further?
Well, my introduction to it was, when NACSW, like, first came out, years and years ago, and I was really excited, and I wanted to bring classes to the place I was teaching at the time, and I was about to get that off the ground, and then I got hired by Purina, and so it kind of, stopped right then. But after that, I started doing IGP with my Malinois Famous, and I was like, this tracking is really cool. Like, I really, really enjoy it. I like the independence my dog is getting from it. I like watching them work. And then that refueled the fire for wanting to get more into scent work activities and kind of playing around with that with my dog and their natural abilities. But barn hunt never really it's a cool sport, absolutely. But I want a sport that I have to like get this indication the specific way, and I want to be a little bit more involved while still being able to watch my dog's natural activities.
Yeah,
Where barn hunt is more it's more instinct based.
yeah,
Yeah, so I kind of like that a little bit more with the scent work, and so I decided to focus on that a little bit more. And so I
yeah.
just what's that?
No, so I was gonna say, yeah, detection definitely gets it where it's you problem solving and interpreting your dog.
Right, right. Yeah. So you have to pick up on all those signals. And I think that's really cool. And I love all the puzzles that you can do. It's not as simple as just go stick your dog in the room and they'll find the thing, right? You have elevated
Yeah.
hides, you have inaccessible hides, you have all of these different things that can come into the play. And then I loved playing around with the markers with it.
Mm.
So I've never been one to go and deliver the reward at the source for my dog. And while that's an important aspect, my method is more of I want independence. I want that
Yeah.
solid nose freeze indication. And I tend to use my markers further away from the dog. So I like that. I like the detail work with it.
Yeah, it's and that was where obviously me and you had common ground right off the bat was, I had been doing the marker stuff in detection for a while, and when people thought I was insane by doing it, your dog's leaving odor, all the bad, things that people will tell each other. Um, but with all that said, what has been your challenges in detection? What have you been like? Oh, this is this takes some work here. I've got to communicate better. I've got to read my dog. But what's been your thing?
My big thing has been teaching a good indication to my dogs that don't already have a good behavior to pair it with. So that's one of the things that I tend to really like is that nose freeze indication because I like my dog to clearly be able to tell me. I don't want to have to guess, right? And so I want that indication to be really solid. Well, I have a couple older dogs who never really learn good duration behaviors. They're more the ones
Yeah.
just to like kind of vibrate through and just do the thing. And so for those dogs, I really struggled teaching a clear indication with because I didn't have that nose freeze to really rely upon.
Mhm.
And so then I tried to go back and teach it, and it was just kind of just a mess. So those are the dogs I tended to struggle with, are my dogs that were more set in their ways and me coming into
Sure.
the sport new. But since then, I've really put a lot more emphasis on teaching the behavior I want separate from odor first, and then pairing them together, like we had mentioned before, and seeing finding a lot more success that way.
I was just going to ask that question, and you answered it. So yeah, it's. I think this is where the people that are learning or getting into detection, whether it be sport or otherwise and professional, is to teach whatever you want that dog to be, whatever its final response, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
Teach that away from the odor. Teach like this is how you answer the question. This is a signal. This is how I want you to give me information.
Right.
Do this, and then it's followed up with reward. Now, then we start giving them conditions to in which they should do this behavior, and that's where the odor can come back in. A lot of times, people are combining those two things together. Confusion comes into the dog. Timing is off. Well, all the different things that we could go down the wormholes, which is we do as trainers. That's where we spend a lot of our time helping people with. But once you do just exactly like you described, you build that. This is what I call now step zero.
Mhm.
In step zero, before I even get to odor, is developing all of these things, get them at a level that's got a reliability to it, and then go, okay, now I'm going to pair it with this is now going to be with odor, or do this when you smell that.
Mhm.
So the that should be in next new class. Do this when you smell that. the and it's you know again, the theme of this episode has basically been, we have to break things down into these smaller chunks and then put them all back together. Which leads me to what I would call my last question here. You have Penguin, who's not a penguin, but is a bird.
Yeah, she's
It-
the one making all that noise back there, and
is
she's
it okay? There you, how has because all the to me the trainers who I've always admired and looked at their skills uh, had birds in their life. How I learned markers was through birds. Um, how has working and training with a bird made you a better dog trainer? And what do you love about working with penguin and birds in general?
yeah, so she's an African pied crow. She's 4 years old. I've had her since she was 16 weeks old. She lacked a lot of socialization when she was younger, and so I fostered another African pied crow when I was younger, and that bird was a lot more resilient to changes in their environment. Penguin is not.
Okay.
So training, bringing different props in for training, like I'm trying to work through the AKC trick dog titles with her. That's my goal with her right
Wow.
now, and picking the behaviors she can do and work through those. But a lot of those behaviors have to do with props. And every time I try to introduce a new prop, we have to go through this whole desensitization phase as far as being comfortable with it, especially comfortable enough to interact with it and not just exist around it. So, crows by nature are naturally suspicious because otherwise they just wouldn't survive out in the wild, right? And so that's
Yes.
ingrained in their genetic component. Where our dogs, they're typically, unless they're bred to be, like a livestock guardian dog or something along those lines, they're not suspicious. And often we're bringing our sport dogs to be overly investigative of new things. And so that has been probably the biggest challenge with her is just that I have to be a lot more understanding of her stressors and a lot more gradual with how I introduce them and how I expect her to become comfortable with them. With the dogs, a lot of times we can use their drive to kind of push it along a little bit, and
Yeah.
slowly feed their drive down. And we are doing exposure without actually doing exposure in that way. And while she has great food drive, it's not ever going to overpower her natural fears of something new.
Mhm.
And so taking that into account is a big deal. And I'm still working around the best way to desensitize her to things.
Yeah.
I have a few different strategies, and none of them seem to be super consistent at this point. So we're still learning together.
And I would say working with birds, the biggest thing I got, or I guess I would say two things. Patience is the biggest one
Yeah.
because there's not much you can do. And then the second thing is timing. It gets your timing better because they're so quick. So you have to capture the thing that you want. Um, and trying to read them sometimes isn't the easiest thing. A lot of movements look very similar. So it really hones in your skills. But I look at, like I said, individuals such as Pat Nolan, Michael Ellis, that, they spent a lot of time working with birds as in their development as trainers of dogs, and both of them take a lot of lessons they've learned from birds into working with dogs. So it's fun watching you do what you do with your bird.
Yeah, so birds, while they love us, and as if you have a relationship with a bird, you get a little bit of leeway. But with our dogs, like, man, we get so much leeway. We get so much,
Oh
so
yeah.
much that we often just take for advantage. That they're so willing to work with us and forgive our mistakes and kind of give us the benefit of the doubt. And birds are not like you don't get that.
Yes.
So it's
No.
very stripped down as far as it's your training that's pulling it through. It's your mechanics, it's your timing, it's your rate of reinforcement. And you have to really, really rely on those things. Otherwise, they're not going to get it, or they're just going to fly away and find something better to do.
Oh, exactly. And keeping them as a captive audience is not an easy thing. They're happily like, I'm gonna go do this instead. You're
Yep.
boring to me.
Yep.
So, this kind of this, I'll add this into it. Earlier, we were talking about the training of the dogs and how we got through things. But one of the biggest things I was listening to was you brought in the term. You didn't bring the term in, but you brought in the technique, least reinforcing scenario as an option when you're working with something. In birds, that's where I got a lot of that from. I saw that dealing with other trainers who I was friends with working with mammals. That LRS is a very important component. Those that don't know it, it just means least reinforcing scenario. I'll let you, if you want to give an example since you're on here, how important an LRS can be in a training scenario.
Well, you go ahead and explain it. With Penguin, as far as like, you just she's going to give me a little bit, but she's going to find the thing that she wants to do and just kind of roll with that as much as possible. Like, if she's nervous around an object, she's going to go find something else to do, and she's just going to leave me there.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. In the way that I use it specifically in dog things is if a dog's giving me a behavior I don't want, everything just stops.
Right. Oh, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and when that just stops, and I'm not doing anything. I'm not telling them no. I'm just the reaction least reinforcing. I'm not doing anything. And I joke around. I use it as an example in the dating world for those that are single out there. When you start ignoring somebody, if they're hitting on you too much or they're saying stupid stuff, and you stop engaging whatsoever, what does that usually do? Makes them change
Exactly.
tactics. So there's an example of least reinforcing scenario that we use as humans and with dogs or even birds. If they were doing something I didn't want, I either can remove the thing if possible. If I can't,
Yeah.
we just everything kind of stops, and then there's no reinforcement one way or the other, good or bad. There's just nothing happening,
Right.
and that starts to go away. Now, again, this is where that reset criteria you brought up earlier is that now I'm going to come back at the next session and go, okay, what can I do to keep my variables lower or more clear? And
Right. Yeah, and
it's
for her, she We always bring up things with our dogs that are self-reinforcing. So she definitely
Yeah.
is the queen at finding something that's self-reinforcing. So the crows are a little bit different from a lot of birds because um, they're going to find a way to get a reaction out of you.
Ah,
So if I'm
interesting.
sitting here and I'm like, playing with the prop that I want her to interact with, or I asked her to do something and she's like, no, thank you. She is going to come over and bite my toes, for example. She's going to get some sort of something out of me and some sort of reaction. And so a lot of it is playing this game of, okay, I know she's going to try to do this. So how can I prevent her from doing that and try to keep her on task as much as possible? So the biggest thing I've learned from really working with her is adjusting that criteria to be low enough where she feels motivated to do it, but not so low all the time that I'm not progressing that training forward.
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing that people tend to miss out on training is they want to keep the dog successful, especially if they have one that's prone to quitting or that's prone to going and find something else to do, and they're not learning how to push that criteria forward still while keeping that animal happy and motivated to do the thing. And so that's a big thing I've learned with her is how do I build this behavior without her getting frustrated or bored or trying to bite my toes.
So for the dog person that has a dog that's not, let's say, so motivated, and we'll push it towards detection for a little bit. What's an idea that you have that helps somebody with a dog that's just kind of like just I'm kind of into it, but I can walk away and go do something else.
Yeah, so, I always suggest doing small training sessions multiple times a day with big, big payouts. So right now I have a retrieve class going on through Fenzi Dog Sport Academy, and we're working on
Mhm.
holds right now. So hold is where the dog holds the item, calm still, like they would for a formal obedience retrieve. And it is the boringest training ever. Most dogs, it's tedious, it's calm, it's boring, it's nitpicky, and it's really hard to keep most dogs motivated while they're learning this behavior. And so they get to the point where I'm like, okay, your dog has a general understanding. There's glimpses of duration happening here. Let's switch to no more than 3 to 5 reps per session. And I want big, big payouts for each of those reps. And I want a reset reward between. So a treat toss. So your dog moves off the platform, they get a thing, they come back. And
Yeah.
so often we'll see these dogs start to diminish in their enthusiasm while they're learning this behavior, and then we implement this change where they're only doing it for 3 reps each time and they get a giant payout and that enthusiasm comes back. And we're not risking the criteria at the same time because I'm not pushing it where my dog starts to chew or they start to get bored or they stop coming back to me. And so protecting that enthusiasm and that emotion in the behavior is definitely priority. And honestly, you can get a lot more done with 3 to 5 reps each session versus training for 10, 15 minutes. And
Yeah.
me, again, being a lazy trainer, it's much better for me too.
Sure. And what I loved about that was I could have put detection into that exact example. I have helped people with dogs that are lower drive, and it's more about the one find
Mhm.
under a very, you know, basic kind of setup. But then the payoff is huge, and it becomes a big event, and it's a lot of fun. So then the dog who wasn't as motivated now comes to that space, to that area, especially after a couple times, is like, "Ooh, I can't wait to do this again."
Right.
And that's where we're starting to do that. And then adding our habituation and our cues to this, then it starts in the parking lot. It starts, with this, then you start seeing that change, versus like you said, where we try to do too many reps in a row, or let's go find 2 things or 3 things, or because the trainer set up 3 hides means I have to do 3 hides. No, you
Mhm.
can just do one. And
Yeah.
it's all you have
Go
to
to the one
do.
your dog can find easily and jackpot that.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. Now, how do people find you? What's the easiest way for them to find you? You mentioned and then mention some of the things that you do. You mentioned some of them, but just kind of cover them so everybody can kind of learn, who don't know who you are, how to find you and what you offer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I teach a couple places online. Fenzi Dog Sport Academy is where most of my teaching happens, as well as through Consider the Dog. I have a couple of courses on there as well. And then I have my Facebook training group, Zoom Dog Life. You can go to my website, www.zoomdogtraining.com, and find out how to join that group as well. And with that group, I tend to do train alongs. So we do a couple train alongs a year and we pick a topic. We recently did tricks. So the working spots got to choose a trick to work on for that train along, and they got that video feedback from me once a day. And then everybody else just gets to audit for free once you're in that group. And then, like I said, we're doing
Nice.
the photography one right now and that as well. Other than that, it's just me training my dogs and the inspiration I have at that moment and the problems I'm working through, day to day. So, yeah.
It's awesome. I mean, not only that, you have I won't call it newborn anymore, but you have a young child now. So
Yes.
you have the baby, you have the dogs, you have the business, you moved, so I'm thoroughly impressed, as I know many others are, with how does this girl have the energy to do all the things that you do?
Who knows?
And yeah, and then adding to that, I know you and I have talked about it, and I'm sure we will get it figured out, worked out either this year or next, but doing more collaborations together, both on the cognition front and the detection.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think there's a lot of great stuff that you could share with people in the detection side of things, that though it may be similar, how you give the message could be even easier received or just a different take. And that's super important for people to get to hear. So I very much look forward to doing that with you.
Same. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, thank you for listening to K9s Talking Sense, where it's okay to be nosy.